to me, I feel like the real revolution is trying to develop a better way for people to organize and to affiliate, and for capital or money to flow, and for these things to be governed, where you have, the blockchain serves as an on-chain record of voting history on something, right? Because a distributed ledger is basically, and I think Andre, you've said this before, it's like a time machine.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Vertical Blocks, where today we're joined by Matt Blaine, a blockchain lawyer who's worked with several protocols in the space, including some that you may know on Phantom, as well as Andre Cronje, who needs no introduction. So Matt, let's turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in this space.
Yeah. Hey Juan. Hey Andre. Thanks for having me today. So I'm a trained lawyer for about 13 years. I've been doing, complex commercial litigation, that's kind of what I'm trained in, which is basically when you take, pardon my French, but like a big leaky bag of shit with a bunch of different parties, and you try to figure out some common sense to it, see if you can resolve it. You litigate it, go to trial, go to arbitration. And more recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, I've also pivoted into startups, mergers and acquisitions, transactions, in terms of like the standard traditional stuff that you see with businesses and real estate and financing and buyouts and business fights and things like that. But I guess my experience in terms of dealing with leaky bags of shit is in part what made me interested in getting involved in blockchain law more, and in DeFi. And the way that I look at it is, it's kind of like, from a legal perspective at least, it's interesting because there's not really like a specific practice area for blockchain law, because it kind of touches on basically everything, from contract to property rights to dispute resolution to regulation and compliance, all sorts of things. So the way that I kind of look at it is that it's similar probably in like the mid or late 90s to, you saw lawyers with practices where they specialized in internet law, but there really isn't a thing that's internet law. It's kind of a combination of everything. So it's interesting to me because, I feel particularly like the tension between centralized and decentralized and where all this is going to go is that having at least some people with hopefully the correct ethos and credibility to try to help kind of, builders in the space, people that are trying to do cool stuff, open things up, essentially restructure the way that people organize, that capital flows, things like that. I feel like it's a critical time. So that's part of the reason why I got so interested. I've been heavily involved in LexDAO, which is not a law firm. It's actually an UNA under the Wyoming statutes, an unincorporated nonprofit association, which is like a legal engineering guild. And LexDAO and some of its spinoffs that I'll talk about a little later, try to do the legal engineering in terms of like smart contract solutions and DAO tooling, so you can make things a little easier for builders and folks trying to organize in this space. And I worked with a few different protocols and stuff like that, either on legal work or governance consulting as well.
Thanks for the intro. Yeah, it's great to hear kind of the whole scope of what you're working on. Maybe a good place to start would be actually just hearing a little bit more about LexDAO. I've been following for a bit, but I'm not as familiar with it as I think, for example, Andre is. So yeah, I would love to hear what you're doing over there and how it works. What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, so LexDAO, like I said, it's not only lawyers that are interested in blockchain. It's like legal engineers. So so whether it be somebody that's a developer, somebody that's interested in marketing, somebody, you could even do lobbying, whatever whatever kind of floats your boat, as long as, you kind of have the same type of, general approach. I shouldn't say approach, because you have differing opinions, but if you're interested in the space, you have something to contribute, and you want to get involved in a group that's focusing on these things, LexDAO is a great place to go. I don't know how many members we have total off the top of my head right now. But there's been some really cool developments in terms of like some offshoots that have happened from folks that have been involved in it. So, I'll just give like a quick run through. There's something called Cali, and I can provide links for these things if you guys want me to a little later. But Cali is and like basically like an on-chain DAO tooling system, like similar to, I guess, what you would see with Aragon, maybe Autonomous and others. But here there's actually like lawyers involved in the founding group, and there's other folks that I think help out. So it's not really just like a startup with these things, where you can essentially form a DAO on chain, through issuing NFTs, work out the governance, figure out what voting thresholds are going to be, figure out how things are going to be managed. I mean, I'm simplifying this a little too much, and I'm not a dev myself, so anybody can hold that against me, and if I butcher it, by all means, anyone can hold me accountable. But and even when I'm saying DAO, like that, I almost use that as like a broad term, like a term of art, because what really is a decentralized autonomous organization when it comes down to it? And most of, I think, what we would even consider to be DAOs today are probably not. It depends where they're going to fall on the decentralized scale. It depends on where they're going to fall on the autonomous scale. They're all organizations, at least. So you at least check off the O, but the D and the A are pretty hard to accomplish. And they're, I look at them almost as like guiding goals or missions, as opposed to like an end state that anyone's going to reach, because they're all basically values that you have to be striving towards. But so you could set it up as, even with Cali, you could do like an LLC, you could do an unincorporated nonprofit association, you could do all sorts of stuff. They also have this thing called wrappr, which is like a component of the tooling, where you can try to actually create and wrap a DAO or something else in an entity, essentially, through the entire process. We have model like operating agreements and UNA agreements, things like that people can tweak as they need. You could bring other consultants into, or lawyers or governance consultants if you want to do that. So those two things are really cool, and it's awesome. You always see these cool things, I feel like, that are getting built in the bear market. So you have people that are kind of putting their nose to the grindstone and actually working out to try to figure out what the next evolution of kind of like organization and like blockchain tooling is going to be. And these are things you can use, even outside of like spinning up a full DAO or some other entity. If you were like an individual dev and you just wanted to have some type of an entity that you're operating under, it's a type of thing that you could do and form like a sole member LLC and stuff like that too. So those are two pretty cool things that are going on. In LexDAO, we also have like the clinic, which is there are lawyers, devs, folks that I think have a little more experience that are training kind of like apprentices to help with, whatever like the governance consulting needs are that, some end client may have, organizational needs, from when you form an entity in the United States and you want it to be like a, some type of get like a 501c recognition. So that way it would be considered, a charity under like the Internal Revenue Code and the regs, trying to help getting that going, whether it be processing paperwork off chain, getting, the person that wants to accomplish it or the group that wants to accomplish it in touch, with a law firm that may be able to assist them. So clinic's actually pretty cool. There are I think like some lobbying efforts that LexDAO is going through, and I'm probably not even accomplishing like laying out everything just because it's a diverse group, and like any DAO, it has its issues, but it also has its own kind of. It's cool to have such like a diverse membership group of everybody that's kind of working and doing different things, whether it be working with protocols and trying to help them, or networks and trying to help them, or other individual stakeholders that are trying to do stuff. So those are like three of the things would be Cali, wrappr, the clinic. I'm involved in this group of like affiliated lawyers that we call like LexFG, where we have maybe 5 or 6 or 7 of us that, depending on any specific need that comes in from a blockchain client, you can retain one of us and kind of run it through the law firm, and then you have like co-counsel agreements with people that are in. I'm in New Jersey myself, so I could have one with one of my colleagues that's Canadian lawyer in Toronto. You retain them as co-counsel. You retain we got folks out in Arizona and California and New York and all over the place. But it's nice to have kind of like a group of people that you can rely on to try to help get all this stuff done. Because when you're just relying on yourself, and we're all busy, and it's nice to have a bunch of people that are experienced and can get the job done, and are pretty well trained. So we've been doing that with LexFG, and whether it be from like funding for a DeFi protocol that's going to get spun up, and you have to do safes, safes or things of that nature, or take back potentially like a convertible note or whatever. So we do all sorts of stuff like that. And then we also do like the governance consulting end, because it seems like sometimes traditionally, if you were to use one of like sometimes if you use certain service providers, specifically legal and blockchain, a lot of the nitty gritty comes down to like, all right, well, how are you going to, it's nice that you formed me this, Cayman Islands Foundation. But like, what does that mean? And then what am I supposed to do with these documents and implementing them with respect to this community that we are going to have, or that we already have? Like, how do we get that done? And what does like sufficiently decentralized even mean? And I would probably tell you sufficiently decentralized is the carrot that regulators always keep in front of your face, so they can keep on pulling it back, and you never quite know exactly what it means, because we haven't gotten guidance on it since 2019, and even then it's not binding. But it's still nice to kind of be able to distill down and give people best practices when we've seen that that those types of kind of like rolling your sleeves up and getting into the implementation part of it is, I think, a pretty lacking area for people that are trying to build stuff and that actually have the credibility and the right ethos and are trying to do it the right way. It's not easy to do. So that's what we do with LexFG. Then we have another group. It's called Cougar DAO. They're focused on essentially trying to bring like ownership interest in real world assets on chain. So they spun up as basically as a Cali DAO LLC, and they're operated through the smart contracts that have been built over there, and they set up their operating agreement. So you can see that like either in the smart contract or in the NFT, it points to like an IPFS site where you have the operating agreement, you have your votes on chain. There's always going to be some off-chain stuff when you're talking about things like this that have to get done. So, so they've actually like bought a farm. I forget where it is. I think it's in like Colorado, and worked out like a 5-year lease, with a real life like farming group that is supposed to be managing it. And then they're supposed to be distributing, the net revenues that are earned, essentially on chain, if that, to the extent that's feasible, stuff like that. So Cougar is doing some pretty cool stuff. And then the same general group over there also has something they call Tater DAO, which is really trying to use NFTs to point to like object, like data points. So if you own, in the case of the farm, if you own a piece of farmland, with the coordinates like latitude and longitude and stuff like that, you can create an NFT that would show kind of like, what the real property is supposed to be. points to, the real life deed that gets filed in a local county or state recording office to show, exactly what the real estate is that it's owned. So there's like, so I've been going on a little too long, I feel like, with this. So I apologize for that. But yeah, I'm using these as examples of like actually some pretty cool stuff that people wouldn't necessarily know of, like outside of, DeFi per se, like next level things that are being built to try to, experiments to see where this whole blockchain, smart contract and method of organizing and associating people and, doing business is going to go in the future.
That's honestly amazing. I mean, I consider myself in this space, and I didn't know half of that stuff. So I mean, that's I do have one question. Do any of those organizations deal with Anons?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
I mean, whether you have if you have a client that's in Anon, if you're a lawyer, you might need to do some type of you probably have to do some type of KYC and requirements at least, and things like that. But you can have, members, you can have different levels of Anon, I guess, depending on what it is. Like are the anonymous devs docs to themselves? Are they docs to like special service providers? But yeah, you can have Anons either as clients, subject to, like I said, exceptions where you need to actually have disclosures. You can have, members that are Anons, and then there's really no limitation unless you're trying to do something that requires some type of a disclosure, and then you would have like Anon with an asterisk next to it, and then explain what the exceptions are.
Oh, very cool.
I think an interesting thought experiment, if we want to call it that, is, well, I'm sure Matt is used to having people take the opposite contrarian argument to whatever he's saying, being a lawyer and such. But to make this as objective as possible, let's do something. Like, I'd like to hear Andre sort of making a bear case of like, what are some concerns around DAOs and DAOs being the future of the way that we govern ourselves, and then maybe Matt responding to that with some counter arguments to those different catches. Because personally for me, I've gone from one side of the spectrum to the other and back again, where when I first got into crypto and got really involved, it was wag me and it was DAOs are the future, and I was all on board. Then I became very disenfranchised with the idea and started to feel like they were a complete failure. And then over time, from working with various different groups, and seeing some of the things that have been rolled out, or even in particular, like working with, I always bring them up as an example because I think they're really, a guiding example is Gitcoin. But even from working with institutions and groups like this, I'm starting to become more optimistic and positive about the idea that there actually is a future here, and that we haven't fully figured it out yet, but that we're en route. So that being said, Andre, what are some of your concerns about DAOs as governance structures and how they're going to propel us into the future?
Well, I think my contrarian take already agrees with Matt, because like what crypto tried to say DAOs is, hey, we don't need to listen to your we don't need to create a foundation. We don't need to create an LLC. We don't need to create some incorporated entity. This magical DAO thing gives us immunity. And that simply isn't true. And I mean, what Matt's already said, is what they're doing is they're using DAOs to basically on-chain codify existing off-chain structures. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong there, but that's what I inferred from what you were saying. So he's not drinking the DAO Kool-Aid. He's not part of that group that's like, hey, this is something new and magical that gives us protection from regulators, because a lot of people try and act like, oh, but it's a decentralized organization, so there's no party and blah blah blah. But that's simply not true. Whether it's token-based voting, whether it's a multi-sig, whether it's individual power, the thing is there is no decentralized DAO because any DAO has human participants. And as long as it has human participants, they need to abide by human rules. The only real DAO that can exist is computers to computers. As long as you have a human interacting there, that human is living in some jurisdiction or was born in some jurisdiction, and there are rules they need to abide by. So some, that's it's hard to have a contrarian take here because like Matt's take is that it's not the Kool-Aid version. It's not some magical this is going to keep you out of jail thing. Like if you try and do that, you're still going to end up in jail. And we've seen precedents moving in that direction. Stuff like the library case, stuff like Mango Exploiter. Like there's been a lot of cases where it's been accepted that these things, the word DAO, I again, and Matt said it earlier, and I really liked it, where it's just really a new word for, or not even a new word. It's a synonym for organization. That's all it really means. Like there's no, a DAO is not some kind of specific structure. A DAO with two members might just be a standard partnership. A DAO with that's nonprofit is a nonprofit. It might be a joint venture, but like that I agree with 100%. Then DAOs work. Then DAOs make sense. But if you think it's going to somehow protect you against regulators, you think it's somehow you can abstain from legislative requirements because of it, then you're in for a real surprise. And that's also why I asked the Anon question, because not all Anons are doing it because they're trying to avoid regulatory scrutiny, but a lot of Anons are Anon because they're trying to avoid regulatory scrutiny. And if you're proactive about trying to work in some kind of legislative framework, there's normally not a lot of reason to be one of those. Anyway, sorry, long way to say that I kind of just agreed with all the points Matt makes, so it's going to be hard to take a contrarian side here.
I try not to drink the Kool-Aid too much if I can avoid it, and it's kind of like what I say to people when I talk to them about what the benefits of a wrapper for some type of an organization that is going to have some elements of on-chain existence. It's like, even traditionally, like the benefits of having an entity or like an organization, because there's a difference between entities. Like entities I would say would be like an LLC or a corporation or a foundation, or something that you would actually like file, where you file a formation document with some governing authority to form it. The reason I use the term organizations is because you could have a trust, you could have like an UNA, the Unincorporated Nonprofit Association, a general partnership, things like that, where you can or even like a for-profit association, right? You can have these things, you can form them, but you don't necessarily need to file like a certificate of formation or incorporation with a governing authority. You would still probably need to like get registered to do business in jurisdictions and have tax filings and things like that. But you don't necessarily need to file a document, get a stamp, and have something that recognizes its form in some in order to actually establish the organization. But I'm kind of digressing. But I did feel like the difference between organization and entity, at least how I use them, is something that's worth distinguishing, because there's a reason why I use the two terms. But so the whole concept of limited liability that you get, whether it be like in organization statute or an entity statute under some jurisdiction, right? That's limited liability. It's not unlimited liability. Like forming an entity or an organization doesn't give you carte blanche to do whatever the hell you want to do and then say, I got limited liability, I'm good. It's like, no, that's not how it works. There's still, like in the US, we have like the participation theory of tort. A tort is like a civil wrong, not a contract breach. If you're involved in a tort, right? Like if I have an entity and you guys come into my property that my entity owns and I trip you and you hurt yourself, like I'm still responsible for tripping you. If I do something that is unlawful or wrong, or I cause that to happen on the behalf of the entity, like I could have personal liability for that. These things still exist. So just forming an entity doesn't give you the ability to run around and do whatever the hell you want. It just is like, all right, well, these are the rules that apply for this entity. These are how we want the rules to apply to us. And we know generally what those rules are. That's really what you're trying to do. And you're trying to at least have some limited liability and avoid like the situation that you have in like de facto or general partnerships where there is no liability shield whatsoever, and all the partners are jointly and severally liable for the liability of the partnership. Like you're essentially trying to avoid entity joint or organization joint and several liability is what it's called. But you still can have personal liability if you do the type of stuff that you would be personally liable for it.
I do want to continue pulling on this thread as well, and I want to get your thoughts, Matt, on specific ongoing topics or conversations like the library case and this most recent update about New Jersey making some sort of proposal for, I don't know if you've been following this, about you can't deploy a smart contract if you are a resident of New Jersey, something like that.
Yeah, and it's actually way more broad than that, because it would almost apply to like any type of digital commerce. So even saying that legislation that has been, I think it's been around for a year and has gotten some press over the course of the last week, but that's not just about smart contracts. It's just like bad law, I think, in general, to try to adopt, and hopefully it doesn't happen. But
all right, so I want to, maybe then we'll talk about library a bit more, but before we do that, just taking a step back from the sort of legal angle, I want to talk about just how effective are these structures, right? Andre, if I recall correctly, and let me know if I'm misrepresenting what you said, but you said something along the lines in one conversation of DAOs are trying to recreate something new when we've had humans building corporate structures for centuries now, and we've brought it as close to perfect as possible. So what is all this experimentation necessarily leading us to? Something along those lines, right? Curious to hear you guys' take. Well, I've got Andres now. Matt, your take on effective DAO governance. Is it a way to mirror what's going on in traditional corporate governance, or is there something experimental and innovative going on beyond that we should be aware of?
It depends what you want to do, right? So you can mirror things. You can take like the copy pasta approach and just try to have the same traditional entity that would operate off chain that has on chain operations to it. But it, in my opinion, essentially like the real revolution that we're having is if it's done right, it's a more effective form of kind of management and organization. All of these, like if you were to look at publicly owned corporations that are, like an S&P 500, right? They have proxy votes, they have shareholder votes, you have things that need to go through whoever your registered broker dealer is, and they send you like K1s at the end of the year. They send you like a 10, maybe you get a 10K, maybe you get a proxy statement because there's a board meeting, and they check the boxes of all these things that are done off chain, but it's really difficult to try to see how things operate from, like, I'm not saying snapshot as in like the voting mechanism, but from like a time and like a point in time snapshot level of like, all right, well, what are the assets? What are the liabilities as best as we can estimate them? How have this group of people voted for these types of things before? Where's the voting power organized? What do the governing documents look like? I feel like with blending blockchain, and the internet, you're able to more efficiently accomplish, I think, some of those processes if you're doing it the right way, better than they have before. If the only purpose for starting a DAO is to, avoid liability, and whoever the founders are have an intention or a possibility of rugging people, like that can happen no matter what, right? So it could theoretically be a more efficient way of rugging people too. Like it's, they're tools, and it just depends on how you want to use the tools. But, to me, I feel like the real revolution is trying to develop a better way for people to organize and to affiliate, and for capital or money to flow, and for these things to be governed, where you have, the blockchain serves as an on-chain record of voting history on something, right? Because a distributed ledger is basically, and I think, Andre, you've said this before, it's like a time machine, essentially, right? Like it creates a record of everything that a certain address has done or a smart contract has done on chain. And if you're able to interpret that, you can see, what has been done in the past. You can try to maybe predict what would be done in the future, but all that information's there. I just did like a brief article for our firm's newsletter on, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, there's something called the Uniform Commercial Code, which has been around since like the 1950s. I'm gonna forget the names of, I think it's the ALI, the American Legal Institute. I forget what the other group is. That's like the international body. But the Uniform Commercial Code is basically, it was adopted by the ALI in, I think, like the early 50s, and over the course of the next 20 years, all the 50 states, the United States, adopted it, through their own legislative processes. So you kind of have like a uniform group of rules as to how the sale of goods goes, how you deal with it's called like secured interests or secured transactions. That's Article 9 of the UCC, and a secured interest is like, so at law there's a bunch of different forms, but you basically have like two rudimentary understandings of it. You have like real property, which is like real estate. Then you have personal property, which is my computer, my desk, like the assets I have in the bank, which is, really just a private database that talks maybe to other private database that says what my social credits are in this bank based on, my labor units that I've contributed or whatever the capital is I've contributed. But so you have, so like your bank, like the money you have in the bank, your accounts receivables for a business, like that would be considered, your inventory would be considered personal property. So you have personal property and real property. Real property, if you want to get a loan against it and pledge it as collateral for a loan, you would give like a mortgage. That's a secured interest in real estate. And if you default on what you owe to your lender, the lender can then come and foreclose on your real estate and try to, whatever the balance of your loan is, try to offset that balance based on the secured interest they have in your real estate. With personal property, it's the secured interest there function the same way as a mortgage, but you have like a security agreement with the lender, which is a contract, and then you have to file something that's called a UCC1 financing statement, which is a piece of paper that you file either hard copy or digitally with like state and or local authorities in the United States, where you send this document in, they put it in their private database. Private database doesn't necessarily communicate well with the other private databases. If you don't file it the right way, you may not have perfected your secured interest in personal property. So you could lose your ability to have that personal property serve as collateral to recover your loan. There's issues with terminating UCC1s. You file what's called like a UCC3, which is a termination statement. If you accidentally, terminate the wrong financing statement, the wrong UCC1, you could find yourself in a world of trouble. because now you don't have a secured interest in the property that you thought was collateral. It's like, and then you need to use all these different service providers and state or county agencies to make sure that you're filing these things correctly, to make sure that you're terminating them correctly. And if you don't, there was one example. It was, I think it was like a 2015 case with JP Morgan Chase was in front of the head of this group of lenders for a loan that was given to General Motors, and there was like a $300 million loan, and they had UCC ones that they had filed, the lenders had filed to reflect their secured interest. They accidentally, when it came time to terminate the UCC one, they were getting ready to file their termination statement. So, you had all these lawyers and other people that were looking at the documents, making sure they were good to go. They wound up filing one UCC 3, the termination too many, accidentally terminated a $1.5 billion UCC 1, went all the way up to in the bank, and GM was the debtor. They filed for bankruptcy, in 2009, as probably everybody knows. Went through the bankruptcy court, went through the Southern District of New York, I think, went all the way up to the New York Second Circuit Court of Appeals, and they said, sorry, your mistake. That's your mistake. You got to live with it. And the group of lenders there wound up losing, like, I think $1 billion because they were essentially unsecured creditors with that. So I'm giving this long-winded explanation because it's an example of how, like, crypto done right can actually fix those problems, because rather than something that was recently passed in the UCC was the Article 12, which deals, it's only been adopted by 4 states. I think it was adopted last year by the ULI. 4 states have adopted it since the ULI came out with it. But it's trying to figure out kind of like if there's a way through smart contracts and a digital ledger to record a secured interest in personal property. And then, since you have the digital ledger kind of serves as that time machine, as long as you have people that can interpret the blockchain the right way and are using the right tools, it should theoretically be easier to try to, terminate these things, to try to establish these things. And it can help to avoid some of the issues we've seen recently, which is one, like, rehypothecation of the same collateral, securing different loans to different lenders. If you have a UCC one that is in a smart contract with the collateral, right? Like, then you're going to know, all right, well, this collateral is already pledged, so I probably don't want to take this for my new loan, because if I do, I'm going to be standing second to the person that already has it. And to also try to avoid, the kind of the insider things that you see and that you kind of saw with FTX, where you wind up having some of the insiders can kind of game their own private system or database. So if you're supposed to have a certain level of collateral available, they can, turn that off and then kind of give you the unlimited ability to pledge whatever your collateral is to, go shitcoining essentially. But so the reason I'm saying this is because, to me, it's like, it seems so basic. Like, there's better ways to do this. There's better ways where crypto done right can actually fix some of these problems. It's just a matter of how you use it and what you want to focus on and how you want to use it. Like anything else, these are tools. You can use tools for good. You can use tools for bad, and it just depends, which are you listening to the angel or the devil that day, or do you not really care? So I don't know if I answered the question. I kind of went off on a tangent, but just trying to use that as an example of cool things that, like, are actually already happening that people watching this may not know about.
It's very, very well answered. Like, dude, that's this. I've learned so much in this chat already. Like all I'm thinking is everyone needs to just contact you. It doesn't matter what the hell they're doing in this space. They need to have a chat. Because damn.
Agreed. Yeah, you answered it and more. For me, all of this is brand new information. So thanks for sharing. I think the next thing that would be really interesting to explore is, because both of you have experience with it, to my knowledge, from opposite sides of the kind of spectrum, is actually, how do you help for example, DeFi protocol that has a DAO operate in a functional manner, right? That's different from a lot of what we've seen out there in, like, a Discord server or whatever it is. So Andre, I assume that you've had some experience trying to manage, voting and DAO proposals with things like Yearn and some of your other DeFi protocols. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. I think every single time I've attempted a DAO, it's been a colossal failure, though. So I'm probably not the best person to give any data here.
I'm curious what you think those failures were, and then I'd like to hear from Matt. What do you think? Is that representative of some of the mistakes you see teams making, and what are some of those most common mistakes? What should people be thinking about, developers in particular, if they're really trying to create a functional DAO beyond just this kind of like, well, I'm immune from everything. If they really want to do it the right way, and I know you've worked with some different protocols, I don't know how much you can share about that. What should they be thinking about? So actually, let's reverse it. Let's start with maybe Matt, and then Andre, you can kind of chime in with your experience and how that reflects on what you've seen.
Yeah, first I think I'll say, Andre, they've been experiments, right? It's like, and whether or not something is a failure is essentially evaluated at any given point in time, right? It's like what's that, like the Japanese story, or what's the story about the man who has his son, and he falls off the horse and breaks his leg, and when you go and ask him questions about, that's such an awful thing, at any given point in time it could be a good thing or a bad thing, you don't actually know if it is. So like, even like with Solidly, right? Like, I think it's really interesting to see what has happened since a year ago when Solidly launched on Phantom, and and then you have like the forks of the code base that are modified, or new things coming out, whether it be with like Velodrome, or even like the Solidly on mainnet now, essentially picking that up. Like, it's really interesting to me to see how, like, even though if somebody was to be asked about, like, well, was this a success or failure in like April of 2022, the answer today in January 23rd of 2023 might be, to me, it's at least a completely different answer. So so you got to, I think, be aware of like the point in time when you're making that assessment. And like, so in my opinion, and I think the ethos is to strive for, like, decentralization. So, and I'll use like Beethoven X as an example right now, because I've been kind of like involved in that community since it launched. Just kind of like by sticking around and hanging out in Discord servers and talking to folks, I think you can learn things and even get a feel for, does this have like, does this organization, are they trying to develop like the culture and the ethos that I would actually like support? And then one of the things that I think like Beethoven X has done an awesome job with has been to really, from like a decision making level, it's been like very decentralized from the start, where a lot of it is community driven. You have community votes that go up. There was like 37, I want to say, different proposals that went up last year, and it's not like the initial contributors where the quote unquote like team are steering all of those. I've made proposals as a community member that were passed. Other people have too. So like, I think it's really, to me, like, you want to have, like, if I'm going to get involved as like a governance consultant, or trying to help someone with this, like, I really like to make sure that like the ethos and kind of like the culture are aligned. And if somebody doesn't have, or a group or an organization doesn't have like a goal of trying to have like the community bootstrapping or decentralization, then to me, like, that's somewhat of an issue. But like, I think that like that should be something that you should be trying to accomplish. It's hard to do, right? Because as people, it's easier, or as anything, you don't even need people, but it's easier to manage things from a centralized perspective, because it just is, right? Like, it's easier to get things done. It's easier to communicate. the tough thing is trying to essentially have it act as like what I would call like a member managed like LLC, where putting aside who are the whales that have most of like a governance token or things like that, right? Which is, we can talk about that issue too, but I won't jump into it right now. But like putting those issues of like proportionality and how you're going to be calculating votes aside, is it something that functions like a member managed LLC, or do you need, like, can only certain people make proposals to try to actually do things from an on-chain or off-chain perspective? Is it like what do you have to do there? And then like what are the mechanisms? Like, can you establish a framework to try to operate? Because no matter what happens, like you still need to have like an authorized representative that's doing stuff, right? Whether it be developing code, implementing code, filing like a formation document somewhere, you still need to like confer authority on someone to go ahead and do something. So like, what are the rules that apply to that? How do you make those rules? Who can establish the proposals? Like, what are the voting quorums? What are all those things? It's and so I've been like pretty impressed with Beethoven X, and then just from hanging around, I've gotten involved, I would guess, with some of the more like with like the core contributors. We put together like a governance framework, that I tried to use like other templates in terms of putting together like my skeletal outline. Other people made tweaks to what they thought would make sense. You have like AMAs and the community asks questions and you try to like refine it, because I don't have like, none of us have a monopoly on like good ideas, right? Like you never know where the innovation is going to come from. You never know, like there's always something that you miss. So it makes sense to have more eyes and voices involved in it, at least as long as they're acting in like good faith, to try to move it forward. So, kind of getting like a framework for like, all right, well, this is how things are generally going to happen. And then even from there, we're in the process, and I've been acting as like a consultant, not as a lawyer, but, trying to now form like a Republic of Marshall Islands, like nonprofit limited liability company with them. So you wind up having, a wrapper with it. So like, there's a bunch of different things you can say, but I think like as long as like the ethos is there and the engagement is there, and I think having a community is actually like an awesome thing if you're using it the right way, and they're not just like cheerleaders or moon boys, that only want like a token price to go up. Because in my opinion, like the benefits of an innovation that you can get from this are more than having something, 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x. Like, that's all cool and that's all well and good. But like what we're trying to accomplish, I think if you distill it down to the people that have the real ethos and the credibility here, is a lot bigger and a lot more revolutionary than that.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't say it any better than that, man. Like it's I don't think I can do anything to follow that up. Matt, you're really awe-inspiring. I have to say, like you've taught so much in such a short amount of time. Like I really I can't recommend people watching this enough. And again, Matt nailed it when it's not just about you have a token, you have a vote. It's about creating structures, and it's about creating what's kind of traditional corporate governance flows, in terms of, okay, so how do ideas bubble up? Who has the rights to execute? Who has veto rights? Which I also think is something that's important, because I think if I had to summarize what I consider my biggest mistakes with DAOs was trying to make it completely decentralized from the start, and that just fails, because you need to have those structures, you need to have those guidelines, you need to have those protection mechanisms. Because another, probably one of my naivest mistakes, was believing that people who present proposals would do so rationally and in the best interest of the ecosystem. That's been proven wrong multiple times. Like people will literally make proposals for whatever. And I think, to add another comment, I think avoid letting people create proposals that influence the tokenomics, because that in itself has a feedback loop to the voting mechanism normally. So don't let people influence the system that creates the voting mechanisms. But everything's so on point. Yo, how long have you been in like blockchain law now, Matt?
Like a year and a half, like a year and a half. I mean, it's like I said though, it's like you come from the perspective of leaky bags of shit, and if you're interested in focusing on leaky bag of shit, it's a great place to be. But the community's awesome though, because it's like most of the stuff, like believe it or not, most of the stuff that I learned, and like I'm saying this stuff, right? But I'm basically just taking a bunch of other people's ideas that I've read and that I've heard about and kind of like repackaging them with my voice, right? So you can learn things on Twitter. Like there's actually like a great crypto Twitter, like legal community of like analysis on things that are going on. So when the SEC filed its like civil action against Avi Eisenberg like last Friday afternoon, right? I mean, like when that happened, I was actually on a call, with another lawyer in New York City, and she and I were talking about, ways to kind of like automate some of the things that like on the proposal side of things, like Balancer right now is trying to kind of like do away with like their maxi community for making sure proposals are in line with what they're supposed to actually look like. And then that's a whole other problem from a practical perspective. It's like, all right, well, are you getting like the right smart contracts in? Are you getting the right modifications in? Are you like, so making sure that those frameworks actually work practically is like a different matter. But so she and I were having conversations about this and about, like the different levels of decentralization and, is there a benefit to kind of going like on the Cosmos approach which is like kind of what DYDX did, where, you kind of have, I guess, like your own network, like your app specific network and validators and things like that. And from like a regulatory perspective, even if you're trying to, like, we were talking about it from like a TradFi, like blockchain perspective, like would it make sense to do that? So that way you could do like slashing and stuff if there was bad faith or theft. I don't think things like that would ever really work in like true DeFi, but in terms of, something a little different, that's like a blended approach, is what we're talking about. But, the next morning I woke up and we were exchanging more emails and talking about, I think I don't go through their paywall and I just feel bad paying for the Wall Street Journal, but there was a nice piece that they had, I think, on Saturday morning about, the SEC exceeding its regulatory authority and, becoming the policeman for, essentially everything. And then there was two great takes, like Gabriel Shapiro had a nice take on the charging Avi, but it's also interesting because now they're not actually suing any of the issuers of the Mango token, but they're essentially saying that the Mango Governance token is a perpetual unregistered security in the form of an investment contract. And the SEC is always against providing clear guidance. It's like, all right, but what does that mean as to secondary sales, right? Because if it was an investment contract upon issuance, and then all of a sudden there's a secondary market that's established in a CEX or a DEX, like, well, what does that mean? Like, is it constantly an investment contract, or is it just an investment contract at the beginning? So there's two great takes. Like, Gabe Shapiro had one on Friday night. There was it Drew Hinkey's had another pretty good one looking at it. And like through these processes of like people sharing information, that's kind of like how you learn ththese things and how you get better. Even I don't remember the name of his law firm, but Lewis Cohen, forget if he's with DYX or what he is. His law firm published like, it's called like the ineluctable modality of security or something to try to set forth, analyze over like 200 United States Supreme Court and Circuit Court opinions, and essentially show that like just because a crypto token, when it was initially launched through an ICO or something like that, was an unregistered investment contract, doesn't necessarily mean, and traditionally in the law, it hasn't been this way, that it's an unregistered investment contract for forever. What happens on secondary sales then, and what happens with other things. So, I mean, I would say like just that paying attention in the space, learning from like OGs that, are sharing their knowledge and trying to plug into that. And, Andre, guys like you, Juan, people like you, like there's like a ton of stuff you can learn, and, and it's pretty cool because it is like, if you're looking in the right places, it's in line with the ESA ethos, I think. And like if you're just smart and you pay attention, you can at least make it sound like you know what you're talking about. So.
Well said. I mean, I think it aligns very closely with what we're trying to accomplish here of really leveraging the collective consciousness to make decisions, allocate resources, all that sort of stuff that you're talking about, Matt, and really, tapping into what's better than 5 brains. I don't know, 10,000, right? Well, not all of them are going to be of the same caliber, but the ones that rise to the top are going to promote great ideas that we may have not thought of before. I think in wrapping up this conversation, like the question I'll leave you with is, I'm sure it's part art, part science, but for the DAOs and the protocols that do a good job of leveraging the collective consciousness of their communities and drive active engagement in terms of things like governance, what is it that they're doing right? What is it that they're doing differently that others could learn from?
I think they're paying attention and they're listening. And it's kind of having that like inclusive mentality as opposed to the exclusive mentality. It's like knowing that you don't have a monopoly on good ideas. That's how innovation has been done traditionally throughout history. Is you stand on the shoulders of the giants that were in front of you and you see what you can do to move it forward. Whether looking at Western political theory, whether it's like Plato and Aristotle, or Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, moving through ancient Rome, and then you start going into like the things that were happening in the Middle Ages to then like Hobbes and Locke and like all that stuff. Like everybody just kind of stands on the shoulders of the people that came before them, and you try to take their ideas and repurpose them into something else. And if your organization is willing to listen and willing to learn and is inclusive and doesn't censor ideas, even if they might be bad ones, like I think those are the most important things. And pay attention to where the rubber meets the road too. It's like when there's a difficult situation or decision that's being brought up, is it something that's being like rammed through because it's like one particular stakeholder that wants to get it done, or is it actually like that you're paying attention, like Andre was saying before, to act like in the better part of like the protocol or the network or the ecosystem as a whole? There's no real bright line test. It's you kind of just have to like pay attention and go for it. And I would also say, if any governance proposals where you're seeing like open-ended like mandates for funding without ceilings are things that are worth avoiding, because it's like that usually shows that there's probably, I shouldn't say probably, but there may be some type of some bad faith there to try to get some money out. And 2, the people that put together the proposal didn't spend the time and energy that was needed to try to figure out what actually needs to get done and like what it's going to cost and how are you going to get it done. So, that's usually a pretty big red flag in my opinion. But.
Well said. I mean, we started with a leaky bag of shit. We made our way to Japanese folk tales and the history of philosophy. So I think it's been a great podcast. I mean, anything else you'd like to add to this, Andre, before we let Matt kind of share a little bit about where people can follow him to learn more and stay up to date with what he's working on?
Nah, I think Matt closed this podcast off as eloquent as anyone I've ever heard. So I think we leave him with the last word.
Matt, let us know, where can people find you?
Yeah, it's been my pleasure to be here. I appreciate it. So on probably the best way is my Twitter handle, which is just Matt Blaine 1. I want to get. I think the Gitcoin rounds are still going on. So and I don't know when this will be aired, but we have like LexDAO has a pending Gitcoin round. So if anybody wants to to donate, by all means go ahead and do that. I think Tater DAO or Cougar DAO has one that's going in the same round too. So, and if anybody wants to actually support folks that are trying to do this and that are looking for funding, I think stuff like Gitcoin is a great way to do it, and a great way to actually make a difference. Just getting support from them, whether it be, you don't even have to necessarily donate, whether it be like a retweet or saying like, this is cool, I'm happy to see that people in this space are doing stuff. From the cool thing about Gitcoin is you just put in like $5, $20, whatever it is, you get your matching, and the more people that are actually interacting with it and the more unique addresses that are donating, the more of the grant is they're going to get at the end of the day. So, I would say do that.
I'd like to see LexDAO join for the next round of Gitcoin grants on Phantom as well, because what they're doing applies to everyone in the space. So that being said, thanks so much for your time, Matt. It's really been a pleasure having you on here, and from the sound of it, we might even have to have you back on at some point. So we have a lot to discuss still. Thanks again, and
My pleasure.
We'll be chatting. See you later.
Thank you.